When the man first heard the knocks, what did he say it sounded like?
He heard a couple faint knocks, and then he heard cries for help. And that's when he called 911.
When they unlatched the locker, they found a young woman face down, lying in a pool of blood.
She had a knife wound through the lung. I can't even imagine what she was going through, just praying that somebody would come help her. It's just absolutely devastating.
The chief of police told me Jenny had been killed. I fell to the ground. She says, Jen's gone. It's just something you never forget.
There was a lot of pressure to get it resolved. I don't think they had a murder there in decades.
This case needed to be solved. I have children of my own. It haunted us.
What was it about Jennifer's murder that struck such a deep personal chord in you?
You want to bring her family justice. This is what we signed up for. You want to get that evil off the street.
Hi, I'm Paula Zahn, and tonight we're on the case in Bedford Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Although the community is just 15 miles from the hustle and bustle of the big city, its quiet streets still seemed an unlikely place for the savage murder of a young woman. And as details of a brazen attack in broad daylight emerged, fear swept through the area. Concerns that only deepened when it became clear that catching the cold-blooded killer wouldn't be easy. August 3rd, 2002. It was 6:14 p.m. when an unusual call came in to the Bedford Park Police Department. The man on the line said he had been loading items into his locker at the public storage facility when he heard some puzzling noises.
The man reported that while he was in his locker, he heard several knocks on the locker that was adjacent to his.
When the man first heard the knocks, what did he say it sounded like?
It wasn't really loud banging. He believed that it was just children playing in the...
The locker was closed, and there was no one else there. Confused about what he had heard, the man decided to report the incident to the manager. When he went to the rental office, was there anyone there?
No, there wasn't. There was a sign that was on the door that said, "Be back in 15 minutes."
The man returned to his locker, and when he heard the knocking again, he grew even more concerned. Then, as he listened even more carefully, he heard something terrifying.
He heard a couple cries for help, and that's when he called 911.
So it was clear to him someone was trapped inside.
Yes.
When police responded moments later, they confirmed the man's worst fears.
They arrived at locker 39. When they unlatched the locker, they found a young woman face down, lying in a pool of blood.
The evidence indicated that the young woman had been the victim of a violent attack. Could first responders tell how she was killed?
It appeared that she was stabbed. They didn't know exactly how many times.
Inside the locker, investigators found more heartbreaking clues.
They also noticed that on the left side of the locker, there was blood smeared up the side of the wall.
The blood painted a grim portrait of what had happened. What do you think the last minutes of the victim's life were like?
Desperation. She was desperate to get somebody's attention. She knew she was hurt. She knew she needed help.
I can't even imagine what she was going through, being left alone, the panic setting in, just praying and praying that somebody would come help her. It's just absolutely devastating.
The disturbing situation darkened even further when police examined the victim's clothing. She was wearing a uniform that identified her as an employee of the storage facility. And there was another chilling detail. What stood out to them?
On the back of the pants, there appeared to be wipes of a knife, which was a signature of whoever the killer was.
They noticed two distinct knife swipes that appeared that whoever killed the victim attempted to wipe the knife off before they left the scene.
How sadistic did you find that?
Extremely sadistic. This person couldn't have a soul.
It left. Was the murder weapon left at the scene?
No, it was not.
Were there any fingerprints found inside the locker?
No, there were no fingerprints or any physical evidence that would have led investigators to a suspect.
Knowing the victim had been an employee of the facility, investigators then searched the rental office.
When they arrived at the rental office, they observed the sign on the door that said back in 15 minutes. When they went inside the rental office, they observed a purse sitting on the desk, which they presume was the victim's purse.
Did they find anything to help identify the victim?
Yes, able to find her personal identification.
Who was the victim?
Jennifer Boyd. She was an employee of public storage.
27-year-old Jennifer Boyd had worked for the Bedford Park Public Storage Facility for 3 years and had recently been promoted to manager. Detectives processed the office for additional evidence. Did it appear as though the office had been ransacked?
No, nothing appeared to be disturbed in the office. It was in a neat, orderly fashion.
But a rental agreement Jennifer had started to fill out that day provided a critical clue.
There was a stack of paperwork that actually had a contract for storage locker number 39. That's actually where her body was found.
But there was no name nor a record of a payment for the locker on the paperwork.
There was no sign of any transaction that had occurred.
Still, the incomplete rental agreement allowed police to develop a theory of the crime. What then did they think actually happened?
She was lured down to the locker. They believed that it was a robbery gone bad.
Investigators knew that Jennifer's killer wasn't after the storage facility's cash.
And it wasn't a bank, it wasn't a convenience store, it wasn't somewhere where you would think you'd go and rob somebody.
But the storage facility did house other people's valuables. And if her assailant had managed to force Jennifer inside one of those lockers, he could have taken his time to burglarize the rest of the facility. A calculated plan that appeared to have descended into chaos after he stabbed Jennifer. So was it their belief the killer decided to flee instead of going back and taking something?
Absolutely.
Police hoped the facility had captured video of the killer during his brazen crime. Did the public storage facility have any surveillance cameras?
No, not at the time.
And no other camera in the area had picked up the suspect to find a witness or a lead. It was already clear detectives would need a break if they were ever going to catch Jennifer Boyd's killer. 27-year-old Jennifer Boyd had been savagely stabbed to death inside a locker at the public storage facility where she worked. Based on the evidence, investigators believed that the violent attack had most likely been an attempted robbery gone terribly wrong. But so far, detectives had no suspects, and they still had to give the heartbreaking news to Jennifer's family. At 6:30 on the night of Jennifer Boyd's murder, her mother and grandmother were trying to figure out why she was late for bingo night.
Jen was the type of kid that if she was going to be 10 minutes late, she would call me.
What time was Jennifer supposed to meet you?
She should have been there by 6 o'clock. I kept calling her cell phone. I called work. She didn't answer. I don't know if it was just intuition. I had a feeling that there was something wrong.
Susan called Jennifer's older sister, Rebecca.
She said she hasn't heard from Jenny. Jenny's not answering. Can I go check on her?
Were you worried?
I wasn't at that time. She's probably just caught up at work.
But when Rebecca arrived at the storage facility, she was shocked by the chaotic scene.
It was all roped off, and there were police cars and fire trucks and ambulances. And so I jumped out of the car, and one of the officers stopped me and wouldn't let me go any further. I was screaming, "Where's my sister? Where she works here?"
The officer returned a few minutes later with the chief of police. Did your heart sink?
Yes. The chief of police came over and told me Jenny had been killed. I don't really remember after that. I fell to the ground. I went there and thinking that Jenny was just going to be talking to a customer. Not that I was going to find out she was killed.
Rebecca called her uncle and asked him to bring her mother to the public storage facility.
There was an ambulance and police cars, and Becky walked up to me, and I'll never forget the look on her face. And she told me, she says, "Jen's gone." It's just something you never forget.
Jennifer's family was crushed. The caring 27-year-old who meant so much to all of them had been taken in a savage act of violence. Jennifer was very close to her grandmother.
Yes.
What kind of a toll did her murder take on her grandmother?
My mom died of a broken heart a year later.
As grief swept through Jennifer's family, detectives had to find a way to get answers to critical questions, including the time frame in which the killer had struck. When was the last time you spoke with Jennifer?
1:20 that afternoon. I was just verifying with her that she was coming to bingo that night, and she said, "Yeah, Mom." And as I hung up, I said to her, "Please be careful today, and I love you." She said, "I love you too, Mom."
Jennifer had spoken with a coworker a few hours later.
She said to him, "My 3:30 just walked through the front door. I'll talk to you later." That was the last time anybody heard from her.
Do you believe whoever arrived at
Yes.
3:30 was probably her killer?
Yes.
Investigators agreed. They concluded that the attack had taken place between 3:30 and 5 p.m. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Jennifer had died from her injuries: a deep wound to her neck and 2 severe sharp force injuries to her back. Detective Sean Gleason of the Cook County Sheriff's Police Department attended the autopsy.
She did have a knife wound through the lung. She had a knife wound to the front of her neck that stretched all the way to the vertebrae.
Were there any signs of a struggle, or was she ambushed?
Ambushed. She was stabbed twice in the back.
The details of Jennifer's autopsy told detectives that they were on the hunt for a deadly and perhaps reckless predator. It was such a sadistic crime, carried out during daylight. What did that tell you about her killer?
Listen, the public storage is a very busy facility. I mean, there's people in and out 24 hours a day.
Police hoped that someone in the area had seen something that afternoon that might advance the case. Did any witnesses come forward who might have seen the killer that afternoon at the facility?
Many witnesses came forward, trying to help.
Did that generate any leads?
No, it didn't really go anywhere.
Investigators were convinced that Jennifer's killer had entered her office that afternoon with a plan to rob the storage facility, but they also had to explore other possibilities.
My partner and I were assigned to do what we call victimology. Does she have a friend, a boyfriend that would have targeted her? Was there some sort of enemy of hers that would have attacked her like this? Because it's a personal, brutal attack.
But after interviews with Jennifer's family, police found no one in the young woman's life who had a reason to hurt her. And that's when the investigation was redirected by a tip that raised a disturbing question. Could Jennifer Boyd's murder have been an inside job? Police investigating the murder of 27-year-old Jennifer Boyd had established a theory of the crime. The young storage facility manager had been brutally attacked between 3:30 and 5 p.m. during what appeared to have been a robbery gone wrong. But who would have attempted such a brazen attack in the middle of the day? Well, detectives were about to get a tip that seemed to answer all of their questions and put them on the trail of a prime suspect. News of Jennifer's violent murder spread quickly. How did the community react to Jennifer's murder?
Jennifer's murder brought pure shock to everybody. If that could happen to some innocent girl that was just at work, I mean, it could happen to anybody.
I don't think they had a murder there in decades. It was emotional. There was a lot of pressure to get it resolved, and rightly so.
Law enforcement agencies in the area rallied to help Bedford Park, even forming a task force to investigate the crime.
Bedford Park, it's like 600 residents. They had 2 detectives at the time. My partner and I got assigned to work with Bedford Park, so we doubled their force, and we were running every single day.
And it wasn't just manpower that the bigger agencies provided. Did any promising tips come in?
Investigators did receive a tip from a detective with the Chicago Police Department.
Police had already identified a new suspect. His name was Maurice Render. And the details of Render's long criminal history set off alarm bells. He was a former employee of Public Storage who had used his experience to stage inside jobs at the very stores where he worked. How did investigators react to the fact that he had been arrested before for stealing from public storage facilities?
That made Mr. Render a prime suspect immediately. He was the top of their list.
Investigators theorized that Jennifer Boyd had been attacked by someone who understood the inner workings of the storage facility she managed. And there was more. Render's previous conviction was for robbing the same Bedford Park public storage facility where Jennifer was killed. Did investigators believe that Render could have known there were no surveillance cameras at that facility?
Absolutely. Having committed previous robberies and also him being a former employee of Public Storage, he would have known.
Detectives found Maurice Render and brought him in for questioning. What did he have to say?
He admitted to robbing the storage facilities in the city of Chicago. He vehemently denied murdering Jennifer Boyd.
Police were skeptical about Render's denial. And even more red flags were raised when he tried to tell them where he had been during the window of time when Jennifer was killed. Where did he say he was?
He was going shopping for a wedding gown for his girlfriend. He also said that he went for a haircut. He also stated that he was running errands for his ex-wife.
So this is a guy who couldn't get his story straight.
Correct. They were very suspicious.
But as investigators continued to build a case against Render, they were troubled that the vicious attack on Jennifer didn't match the pattern of his previous crimes. Did he ever physically attack the people he was robbing?
No, he didn't seem to be violent in his robberies.
During the robberies, he would put his hand or a gun under his sweater, and he would point it at his victims. Maurice never once was indicated in using a knife.
And despite all of Render's inconsistent alibis, police had no witness who could place him anywhere near the crime scene. Could detectives find any evidence connected?
Suspect list.
Detectives were forced to move on. And an abnormality in Jennifer's bank records changed the course of the investigation. Her credit card was used just hours after her murder.
Where? It was used approximately 3 miles down from the public storage at a Shell gas station.
Police were stunned. They had no idea the card was missing. It didn't appear as though anything had been taken out of Jennifer's purse. Where did that credit card come from?
They believe that she had it in one of her pockets.
Investigators raced to the gas station to see if surveillance cameras had captured an image of the suspect. Did the cameras pick up that transaction?
It did.
Would the video be the clue that broke open the Jennifer Boyd murder investigation? Authorities investigating the murder of Jennifer Boyd had just gotten 2 big breaks. One of her credit cards had been used at a gas station right after her murder, and that transaction was captured by surveillance cameras. Now police hoped the video would lead them straight to her killer. Investigators in Bedford Park, Illinois, reviewed the gas station's video. It appeared that Jennifer Boyd's killer had used the young woman's stolen credit card for gas. Could the suspect be made out?
No, the video was too grainy. All they could determine was that the vehicle that pulled up was at pump 4.
Did it help you identify a vehicle?
No, there was a vehicle, but we didn't have a make and model.
Detectives refused to give up on the lead. They hoped using advanced technology might allow them to obtain a clear frame from the video. What lengths did investigators go to have that tape analyzed?
The investigators sent it out a couple of times. The first time was to the DuPage County Sheriff's Office, then they actually sent it to NASA. They have the video enhanced. But unfortunately, the video is still too grainy to identify anybody at the pump.
The task force was frustrated, and they had to face a growing concern that their unknown suspect might strike again. For those closest to Jennifer, it was the deep sense of loss and the lack of answers that haunted them.
You always feel like you're immune to something like this. You see it on the news. It's never going to hit your family, your friend. But that's when you learn that it can happen to you.
They had no idea at that time who had done it or why.
The public storage company where Jennifer had worked offered a $25,000 reward to anyone with information about the crime. But the tips went nowhere. In fact, it was more than 2 years before the next credible lead when a man named Matt Christensen contacted police with information about the mysterious stolen credit card. And Christensen believed that the credit card could have been connected to Jennifer's murder.
Yeah, Matt believed that the credit card his friend was talking about was the one that was used at the Shell gas station.
Christensen claimed that one of his friends had mentioned having to get rid of a hot credit card in the days following the murder. Although detectives were skeptical about the vague details Christensen provided, his criminal history and those of his friends made the account one police couldn't ignore.
They were all burglars. They would burglarize businesses in Bedford Park and around the city of Chicago.
Any public storage facilities?
Yes. Armed robberies at public storage facilities in the area.
The crew also used vacant public storage lockers to hide stolen property.
They would find vacant storage lockers, and they would store the stolen items into these lockers.
The MO of those crimes sounded a lot like what investigators suspected had happened to Jennifer. But the lead seemed to fizzle when police approached Christensen's friend.
He denied any knowledge of a credit card or any knowledge of the homicide.
He denied ever even making a statement to Christensen about the credit card.
Despite the setback, police knew that the best tips on Jennifer's murder would come from shady sources like Christensen. So they weren't surprised when the next lead came from a convicted armed robber named Jim.
He wrote a letter while he was incarcerated in prison in Illinois, stating that he had information about Jennifer's murder.
What was the reaction of investigators to his letter?
There was a little bit of excitement when the letter came in, but you're skeptical because it's a gentleman that's in prison, so he really has nothing to lose and possibly something to gain.
Did he ask anything in return for the information about Jennifer's murder?
Yes, he asked for immunity in the murder of Jennifer, and he also requested that his current charges that he was incarcerated for be dropped.
Detectives traveled to the prison, but when investigators entered the interview room, it became clear that the visit to Goebel wasn't even worth their time. What did he tell them?
He told them he knew nothing about the murder.
But that flew in the face of what he had written in his letter.
Correct.
In fact, Goebel shut down the interview even before police had asked him a question. He refused to discuss the letter and appeared visibly frightened of something or someone. At that point, where did the investigation stand?
The whole investigation came to a complete standstill.
And for the next 10 years, it stayed that way. Until detectives Andy Smokowitz and Dave Weston took on the case. It had been a decade since Jennifer's murder. Why did you decide to take on your own investigation?
This case needed to be solved. I have children of my own. I couldn't imagine what the family was going through. It haunted us.
What was it about Jennifer's murder that struck such a deep personal chord in you?
You want to bring her family justice. You want to get that evil off the street. This is what we signed up for.
In most investigations, long years without progress make a crime much more difficult to solve. But as the new team analyzed the case file, they believed that the passage of time would actually be the key to bringing Jennifer Boyd's killer to justice. The murder of Jennifer Boyd had gone unsolved for more than a decade, but a new team of detectives believed that several witnesses had withheld valuable information during the original investigation, and they now hoped that the passage of time and a fresh approach might get them to reveal the truth. Detectives Andy Smokowitz and Dave Weston had carefully studied the Jennifer Boyd case file, and they believed that the original investigators had come very close to finding her killer. One of the most intriguing reports they needed to follow up on involved Matt Christensen, a longtime burglary crew member who had provided police with a tip about Jennifer's stolen credit card.
We hoped that somehow, some way, he had significant information about the case.
But talking with Christensen a second time would prove to be impossible.
Matt had died from
A lot of secrets were now buried.
Yeah, there was a huge wall. We had to find a way to go around that wall.
The detectives interviewed those closest to Christensen, trying to find someone he might have confided in, and their hard work paid off when they received a new name.
A woman who used to date Christensen at the time of the murder by the name of Diane.
I know you carefully reviewed the case file. Did you ever see the name Diane in it?
Diane's name was nowhere in the case file, which was very exciting to us.
And from the moment they arrived at Diane's home, it appeared that she might be the witness that would break the case wide open. What happened when you knocked on Diane's door?
We've identified ourselves as investigators from Bedford Park, investigating a cold case homicide. And to our surprise, she said, "Come on in, I know everything about it."
Diane told the investigators a shocking story about an associate of Christensen's, Stephen Podkolsky.
She said that Stephen Podkolsky came over to where she resided, and he requested that Diane leave the room because he needed to speak with Matt Christensen in private.
She pretended to go into an adjacent room and pretended to close the door, but she secretly listened to their conversation.
And what Diane heard was terrifying. Podkolsky confessed to the savage murder of Jennifer Boyd inside a public storage locker. Did she share with you any detail that the public didn't know?
Yes.
What was that detail?
He said that he wiped the knife off on her pants before he fled the scene. That detail was never released to the media.
Nobody had that information. This is the piece that we were looking for.
Did you ask her why she hadn't come forward sooner?
Yes, because she was terrified of Podkolsky.
He's very intimidating. Steve Podkolsky reigned in fear.
But now, a decade later, the weight of carrying Podkolsky's secret had become too much for Diane. Detectives raced back to the station to pull Podkolsky's rap sheet. He had a long list of prior crimes.
He was an extremely violent person. He was in and out of prison most of his adult life.
Podkolsky was currently serving a 5-year.
He was going to be getting out of prison. We knew that that deadline was coming.
You were really in a race against time.
Yes, we were.
Detectives knew they still needed more than just Diane's overheard confession, and they found another lead to chase down in the original case file. They tracked down Jim Goble, the inmate who had written a letter to police and then seemed too scared to talk.
Jim did not trust the police. We figured that he wasn't going to want to speak to us.
And getting Goble to open up seemed even less likely now. He was out of prison and no longer had anything to gain. But surprisingly, the ex-con agreed to talk with the detectives, and his chilling story filled in more pieces of the puzzle. Goble said he had actually been with Stephen Podkolsky on the day of the murder.
They went to public storage that day to run a locker to put stolen items in from our previous burglary.
As Goble sat in the car waiting for Podkolsky, he glanced out his window and saw Podkolsky with a young woman in a public storage uniform.
He observed Stephen and Jennifer walk out of the office, proceed through this gate, down to locker 39.
A short time later, Goble said that he heard a woman scream, and he observed Podkolsky run back towards the parking lot.
What did he say Podkolsky looked like at that point?
He said that he had blood on his shirt.
As the car sped away from the storage facility, Podkolsky casually discussed Jennifer's fate.
Goble asked Podkolsky what had happened. Podkolsky said he had to push Jennifer in the locker so he can go back and burglarize the public storage facility.
But Jennifer started to scream.
When he was attempting to put Jennifer in the locker, he said that he had to stab her to keep her quiet.
Goble said he had written his original letter to police because he was concerned he might be implicated in Jennifer's murder if they ever spoke with Podkolsky. And now, years later, that same fear had returned. Investigators now had 2 witnesses who had told them the same terrifying story. Both named Stephen Podkolsky as Jennifer Boyd's killer. Detectives decided to visit their prime suspect behind bars at the Statesville Correctional Facility. What was your strategy going into your interview?
but he was fishing a little bit. He wanted to know what information we had.
Investigators pressed Pekulski and confronted him with their witnesses' accounts, but Pekulski simply shrugged and denied any role in the crime.
There's no remorse at all for anything that he did to Jennifer. He's the most evil person I've ever met. Pure evil.
But detectives prevailed. On the day Pekulski was scheduled to be released from prison, Bedford Park police arrested him for the first-degree murder of Jennifer Boyd. The ex-con's calm, cool veneer was shattered. What was Pekulski's reaction to his arrest?
He was throwing a tantrum. He flopped on the ground and laid there. Eventually, he had to be wheeled out and placed in the back of one of our squad cars.
How did that make you feel?
We did it. We had him. He knew it was over.
When investigators asked to meet with Jennifer's mother, she was braced for the worst.
They're going to come and they're going to tell us there's nothing they can do. They can't find who done it. I just had that feeling that they would never find me.
Then detectives gave her the news about Stephen Pekulski's arrest.
You could have knocked me off the chair. I was just so shocked.
Stephen Pekulski pled not guilty. Prosecutors knew it wouldn't be easy to get a conviction without physical evidence connecting him to the crime. But the witness accounts were powerful. What was the hardest part of the trial for you?
Hearing that witness talk about my sister screaming when she was being killed.
In the end, the jury was swayed by the emotional testimony. Stephen Pekulski was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Did Jennifer and your family get justice?
Yes. It was just a weight lifted off of me. All of these years of going through all of this was worth it. I felt like this was the last thing that we could give Jenny.
Jennifer's family is incredibly grateful for the hard work of law enforcement, but the satisfaction they felt after the verdict faded quickly, and loving Jennifer inside Locker 39.
The pain is still there. We live with this pain, and grief is something that you don't get over.
Took our heart. Jen was the heart of the family. Part of my heart's missing. It'll always be missing.
Jennifer's family has adopted a new Christmas tradition to remember her kindness and generosity. Every year, they choose a worthy family and donate presents to them in Jennifer's name. I'm Paula Zahn.